would have been an appropriate response to 911? And you can take this question any way you want. At the national level and at a personal level, what would have been a different response and a more appropriate response than what we have seen for the last 10 years?
At the very initial reactions that the nation had the seeds of the kind of response I would have hoped would have grown, and that was that bookstores sold out of the Quran immediately after 9/11. People were asking, why were we attacked? What's behind this? And there seemed to be this genuine desire not to excuse it or to explain it away, but to understand it. And for me, that is that's something that's really important, because when you're attacked, the instinct is to respond in kind. It's like reflexive, and I remember the nation was holding its breath. I felt a collective holding breath till we attacked Afghanistan. There was this sense that we had to do something. There had to be a response, and it had to be loud and clear that we will not let this happen to us. And it was this, I think, very natural and instinctive, and I felt it too, but I felt at the same time the foolhardiness of it. I thought, what will come of it? What's going to happen? How will you defeat violence with violence? I don't get it. If we're doing the same thing to them that they did to us, where's the difference? How are we different? Why do we think we deserve to survive or to be the leader or to be the, I don't know. I wanted to see us respond from a place of creativity rather than reaction. And I still think that that's possible, because I do think that was also part of our initial response, was to understand. And when I, have gotten, through the Raven Foundation, gotten to know Ishmael well, and I see the harm that's done to American Muslims and how patriotic they are and how they feel unwelcome right now, and maybe a little frightened. And that breaks my heart. So I think building relationships, being creative, and just one more thing. When President Bush asked us to go shopping, I thought I would die. And I thought people wanted to know what they could do. People were willing to make a sacrifice. People were willing to change. People were willing to do something different so that our perception in the world was different. And he just asked us to keep doing the same old thing. And so I just think the desire is there, the willingness to sacrifice is there, and the willingness to change is there. It just needs to be focused.
Shortly after September 11th were the high holidays in the Jewish religion, and I couldn't fathom getting on a plane. So I actually drove from Chicago to the New Jersey area, and every single toll booth I passed through, the person asked me, "How are you? Who did you lose? Where are you going? Are they safe?" Every single toll booth. And then under every overpass was an American flag. And it was this sense of being part of a nation. And I'm not one of those people who puts a flag up for July 4th or Memorial Day, or I don't feel so rah-rah American. There's a lot of things that I criticize about this country, and yet I choose to live here and love a lot of freedoms about America. But I think land of the free, home of the brave, this card-carrying democracy, I'm not so sure it's all the freedoms we think our founding fathers put together. And I struggle with that. So I had this moment of America the Beautiful, really connected, really caring, really compassionate, and really, really collaborating in the best sense of the word, where people cared about each other's shared humanity. And that lasted for, I think the American flags in people's windshields lasted a lot longer, but I think the true feeling of that didn't even last for a few months, which I think is very telling. And then people went back to life as usual. And shortly thereafter, 6 weeks later, exactly to the date, we had a Genesis event at the Chicago Cultural Center. And my work is about, a predominance of our work is the art of the Middle East and North Africa. And we had a 6-hour program, and we're bringing in a very famous artist named Ali Jihad Rassi. And I thought, I'm never going to find a hotel room for this man with a name like that. And I remembered I called the Ambassador West, which doesn't exist anymore, and there was dead silence on the other end of the phone. And I thought, I'm going to put this guy up in my house because I'm never going to find a place to put him. And at the end of the silence was, yes, we have a room, and we're going to give him the suite at the top of the hotel. And it turned out that the person who managed the Ambassador West is also Muslim. And I am since in touch with him. He's now moved to the Hotel Monaco, and we work together in getting our artists housed in different hotels. And it was just a moment and a reminder that it's not all gloom and doom, and you find those people everywhere. So I think that's the personal note. On the other note is, I think we as Americans and those people who haven't traveled a lot in the world live in a delusion that everyone loves us. How could anybody do this? How could anybody hate us so much? And I think America's played a very dirty game in the world, doing a lot of work, funding rebel groups, arming them, doing different things, and then lo and behold, the tables turn and those people turn against us. So it's happened in Afghanistan fighting the Cold War. It's happened in Vietnam with the Cambodians and the Vietnamese. And a lot of my work is in the Middle East. So we're doing a lot of this again and again and again. And I think really to take stock of September 11th is to sit and think about not so much the action-reaction. Why are we such a reactive culture? I come from a tradition in the medical field, so we take care of preventive health after you've had the stroke, after you've had the heart attack. Go into cardiac rehab. Well, how about losing the 25, 30 pounds before you have the heart attack and live an extra 20 years to watch your grandchildren grow up? And I think we need to pull a preventive model to conflict. And it's actually one of the very fundamental reasons I left medicine was to leave that to someone else and to work on a preventive model for conflict transformation. And so I think September 11th on the 10-year anniversary is just another, where have we been in the last 10 years? Where's the gap? Where can we close that gap, or not even say there's a gap, but recognize we're really not much further along at all. And think about what we need to do as a whole.
Both in looking at what we had together as we asked what could we do, and also this waiting until Afghanistan happened. And I was very ambivalent about Afghanistan, the same way you were, in the sense that this is useless. But on the other hand, we got to do something. And but I remember that the whole world was giving us their condolences at that time. Every country. Now, there were a few things that were highlighted about people dancing in the streets and things like that, but that was a minority situation. So we missed this wonderful opportunity to actually have a dialogue, even with people that we had conflicts with, we were enemies with, and we missed that opportunity to say, let's all sit back and use this as a time to look at who we are, what we're doing, not only the United States, but all of us. because we know that this can happen anywhere, and we miss that opportunity. But now, 10 years hence, is there anything that we can do? And I really think this 10-year anniversary is another new opportunity, maybe to get it right this time and say, look, Iraq didn't work, Afghanistan didn't work. Let's go back, reset, and look at what's going on in the world. How can we resolve these conflicts? How can we have compassion? How can we deeply listen to each other in a way that we really get other people's pain? Because I saw that 9/11 incident as a huge cry for help. Those guys, you know, were crying out to be noticed, to be paid attention to, that they actually gave their lives for it. And we look at them as villains, but in their way, they were really crying for help, and we didn't listen.
I remember the day of it happened, asking myself the question, how shall I choose to remember this day? What shall I remember that will stand me in good stead, when it comes time to deal with all the others who may differ from what I have to think about it, knowing how my neighbors were going to think about it, hearing expressions by telephone over the back fence of their outrage, and I thought, you know, one of our problems is that we treasure, we savor, we look for memories that reinforce the worst of us. We want to remember that it was the lousy Japanese. Okay, is that how you want to remember Pearl Harbor? Is that how you should? I don't think you should. This is a battle everybody has, you know, and I struggle with it to this day. I think of the Holocaust. My armored division entered two camps. And what I saw then, you know, I'm a kid. I mean, a total shock. And then, but at the same time, I kept thinking, how should I remember this? Should I savor this up to such an extent that no other possibility other than the selected definition of the right or wrong of this should prevail? You know, how do I do that? How do I do that? I still don't know. We don't get to choose our memories, I guess, but we can, I think, keep addressing them and say, why did I remember it that way? I mean, what was it that I remember about, you know, the dog barking when this occurred? Completely inane, completely off the subject. Except those are the things that pop in your mind. You say, well, no, so how shall I think of them? My son spent 6 years in Vietnam as an officer, and he came back damaged goods. I played his recordings a few months back. I found them in a box that he had sent. And I called him. I said, do you remember when you're in Vietnam, you kept sending recordings out in the jungle and all that? And they're very upsetting to me. My wife won't listen to them anymore. I thought, well, how should I remember that when I go to Vietnam? how should I think about the Vietnamese? And my memories there prodding me, saying, you know, those were bad guys, really bad. Your point, we're not the greatest people in the world, okay? We are so peace-loving that we've started more wars than almost anybody. How's that for aggression? Okay, and I recognize the aggressiveness right here, you know, because first thing you say, well, okay, just tell me who I kill. Who would that be? I don't want to make those selections. I've got to find another way to put history to work for me in this regard, so that when I pass it on to my students are 20 years old. They were 10 when this happened. What's their memory? Pretty vague. Pearl Harbor, what's that? Okay. Vietnam, never heard of it. Okay. You know, so there's a time element here in terms of memory that does some magical things. If we can figure out how to address in a public and in a social manner how we choose to remember this event. And one of the keys, I think, is that without disrespect to those who suffered, we have to address the issue of continued victimization. I mean, we raise it to a level where now is that's the measure of who I am. I was a victim. That doesn't work very long, okay? And it leaves you in a morally null position when it comes to addressing the question you ask. How should we go to this, okay? I have to say, somewhat in jest, I'm reminded of a Peanuts cartoon. Linus and his friends, her friends, are all lying on the hillside looking at clouds. And one of them says, "Well, I see Beethoven playing a piano," and another says, "I see the end of mankind." And Charlie Brown said, "I was going to say I see a horsey and doggy, but I don't think I will."
Well, what comes to my mind is, I mean, certainly the response wasn't monolithic. There were many. We had many responses. I had many responses, and we had many responses. And kind of in this memory construction business, like, which ones did we do? What did we actually do? Is it, did we go shopping? Yeah. Did we, we did a lot of things. Did we take the opportunity to feel what it was like to not be the ones in control? Maybe that was the period of time that in that first couple of months. And I think it's fairly un-American to stay there. For better or for worse. I mean, maybe that's something. So maybe that's the opportunity, or maybe it's one of the opportunities here to, like, whoa, what was we were pretty excited about. We were, I don't know, I think we've always been, but we certainly were pretty excited about being American about it, responding in an American way. People did amazing things. People did heroic things here in the States. And I guess I use that word, heroic, for like the neighbor-to-neighbor things, and the things that you're talking about, when you're driving, the way that people reach out to each other, and the way that people are expressing the shared experience the experience of feeling a unit, a unity in the country, you know. One of the things I teach is I teach people to get into trouble because it creates conflict, and that creates good drama. And when I'm teaching people who are successful in their lives, it's hard for them to get into trouble. They don't want to yell at their friend. They don't want to. They don't want to. They never want to say "shut up." There's things they've learned to do, but because they're successful people, they've gotten into college, or or they're working. They know that this stuff doesn't work so well in creating interaction, harmony, which leads to something useful. Well, on stage, what we're looking for is conflict, is the opposite, and so we're looking for people to get into trouble and to do things on some level, to do things poorly, to just want what they want, and without any regard for the other person. To demonstrate that's gonna be interesting drama. And one of the things that conflict creates is an opportunity for your partner to be a hero, for your partner to just pull the rug out from under your conflict building, or approach it from some other way, or to heighten the conflict. Right? It could do anything. Anything could happen. Maybe a way to illustrate that is we'll just do a game where people are running and falling, and other people have to catch them, or not. And there's a way to fall in order to be supportable. There's a way to fall so you just take a header to the ground. But there's and we learn this way. Oh, how can I fall so that I am catchable? How can I put myself really in your hands in a way that it's possible for you to be there for me, as opposed to in a way which I can say, no, I told you so. You couldn't catch me. You couldn't help me. I'm beyond help. And there's something in that about there's something in there about it's a fiction. It's a fiction. What I'm doing is I'm teaching people a fiction. Like I'm actually giving them a technique so that they are supportable. But the story that comes from it is the same as if it were true. They feel like someone has caught them. They feel saved. They feel supportable and held. All that they talk often about. The language we use is important in this. So we establish a language usually before, and that's what they usually use when we talk about the experience afterwards. But the truth is also that they've been held, that their full body weight has been supported by another person, that they have been taken into account in a way which it's unacceptable socially to just take a stranger's weight, to touch them in a way which is functional, as opposed to in a really safe zone. Arms, hands, shoulders are about as core as you get for safety. This is fairly unsafe. This is unsafe, right? And this is related to that we're animals. That this is all the stuff. That this is where the emotions are happening. That this is essential to breathing. And so there's there's an opportunity in this word that Paul was using of being a victim to feeling oneself helped. And it turns out that this takes practice. That it's something which we learn not to do as we age. And it's unusual for me to need to teach that to a child. Children are pretty good at it. And they spend their lives, children, having things made fair for them if they're lucky enough to live in America. Like, that's what our education system tries to do. It says, oh, things should be fair. If one person gets this, everyone should get it. And so they have this sense of that balance or fairness. But there's something to be gained from the practice of the experience of the unexpected experience of needing. How to be grateful, how to be loved, how to be grieving, how to be in pain. Anybody who's lost people, the only end to the pain is the end to the pain. And it's funny because we've all lost people, and we all kind of know that privately or personally. But to accord that, to walk around with a largesse in culture, in a city, it takes a lot of energy to do that, and it may not be wise. You may not be able to function. You may not be able to be this. You may not be able to be this successful person who you actually also can be. It's a choice. I spent a little while after I'd been teaching this for a little while. I couldn't not make eye contact with homeless people, and I became somebody who homeless people walked toward and just asked for things from. And I had to set a limit in my head in the morning before I went out, what I would give, what I could give. I was a student at the time, I was living on that budget, and it wasn't until by accident I got a motorcycle because I was living in New York City at the time, and it was the best way to get around, doing what I was doing, but I made an agreement with my sister that I would wear a motorcycle jacket at all times when I was on the bike, even in the hot weather. Just like I would wear a lot of protection. So I bought this fairly Terminator-like motorcycle jacket, and as soon as I put that jacket on, nobody approached me. And I learned a lot about armor there. That I didn't need. That I had learned how to disarm the manifestations of armor in my physical being. How to be soft. How to be receiving. But these clothes, this specific suit, was a shield for me. And so I guess that's a long way around to, maybe what I would hope is that we can take the opportunity. We don't need another 9/11 to have another opportunity to disarm ourselves. If it can be the big drum that's beaten so that we can have that experience just as it occurs to us, as it actually occurs, because it will. And we can disarm and even the next step would be to breathe with each other. That would be that would honor the legacy of everyone who has suffered. From 9/11.
Really struggling how to answer that question. As you mentioned, Wendy, that there are like 9 different layers to this. Personally, I wish that I didn't suffer so much disappointment in how our country has, for the last decade, no matter who's been in office, dealt with this. And there's a lot of frustration for me. That's a personal reflection. Because I feel like we squandered opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Friends of mine have been to Europe several occasions, and depending where you go in Europe, there are monuments to the destruction of the Twin Towers in Europe because they felt so much connection. And they lost friends. It's a huge financial center. This is an international center. It's not just a New York center, and people across the globe lost friends that day. And we were like, buckled down and be American. And I'm from rural Virginia, and I get buckled down, be American. I own boots. I learned to driving a pickup. I have cleaned out stalls, and I have put in a barbed wire fence. I am a white Southern male Baptist preacher. I am American. And it's horrifically disappointing for me. And as someone who is religious, publicly religious, it's just been a nightmare. For all the right reasons. I mean, you said it so well a decade ago, and reiterating it, I've seen the quotation. I think religion has been hijacked, period. The hijacking of a single world religion has encouraged the hijacking of many others, or just the total neglect of things, whether it's religion or you. Adrian, you were saying it so beautifully, just in terms of your own art. Religion is supposed to create a posture of vulnerability and peace. And when you pray, it's the Orion's position, your arms are held out like this. Everything is opened up. That's how you're supposed to pray, and when you're the presider in a worship service. And yeah, it's kind of the both and because you're wearing a robe, and that's armor. Make no question about that. And sometimes in church you could use a little. But you stand up there with your arms open and you proclaim blessing.
Yeah.
I bless you. We bless one another in the name of God who created us in this mode of receptivity, this place of vulnerability. And it's not about numbers. It's not, the shifting American yada yada religion. It's, some people speculated that religion would have a boom of some kind after all this. And of course, the opposite happened because religion or religiosity got the blame for it. And so it doesn't matter where you are, you're Buddhist, you're Muslim, you're Episcopalian, it really doesn't matter. And then it all came to a head again when we were debating about whether or not there should be a mosque, all of a half a block from where there was already a mosque. And the people who were standing up and actually saying that there should be, interestingly, were often the other religious folk who were already down there. Trinity Wall Street, the little Orthodox church that was crushed, the small, was it St. George's or something like that, little tiny Orthodox church that was crushed under the weight of all the steel that fell on top of it when the towers collapsed. They still don't have a building. But even they were like, right, everyone should have a building here. Yeah, I visited New York 3 years ago, and there's still a great big hole in the ground. When people have been begging for a sanctuary, begging for a monument that says we have got to be in this together or it's all going to fall apart. So there should be shrines or holy spots in a big field, and it should be for as many world religions as we can fit. And I don't know, there are 1,000 world religions. We buckle down, be Americans, figure that puzzle out. I would much rather figure that one out than how to get into Afghanistan and then try to how to get out. I'm a great fan of technology. I'm all over the internet. It's ridiculous and wonderful. Met this guy 4 years ago, on YouTube. Ibrahim lives in Pakistan, and his father is an imam of some renown. And his sister, well, back up. Ibrahim and I found each other in the same little community of crazy YouTube people making goofy videos and talking to one another all the time. And we kept finding ourselves on the same side of the religion debate. Is religion good for you or bad for you? And here he is, this Pakistani-based 25-year-old, and me, this Baptist guy from Virginia, talking about how religion is good for you and defending religion to everybody else who's just angry as hell. He and I connected and made this great friendship, found each other on Facebook and everywhere else you can find one another. Just struck up these long conversations. His father's one of the people that the Vatican calls in when they want to talk about interfaith peacemaking. The American government calls this guy in. If you want to talk about the Muslim world in Pakistan, this is the guy you talk to. Well, his sister won a Fulbright and ended up coming to Northwestern. And I got a phone call. Hey, this is Ibrahim talking to the guy on the phone. How'd you get my number? Well, the internet. I'm like, of course. My sister is moving to Northwestern, and I didn't want to make a big deal of this because she will be the first woman to practice family therapy in Pakistan history. Because, some of us are conservative. He said some of us are still conservative enough that a man would never come to a woman to talk about what's going on in the family. So we wrestle with this dynamic, but she will be the first woman. Wow. She needs a brother while she's there. Yeah. And you were the person I thought of. So I met Miriam. Wonderful name. Fabulous woman. She just got married last week. She was at our house for dinner. We were at her place. We made family. The technology, the opportunity. The frustration for me is on every level, however many levels of this, the opportunities available to us to make peace, to build community over thousands of miles of distance. A phone call, a YouTube video. And for me, and this is where the practitioner, the Christian person in me comes in. It's in the liturgy, and we do it every Sunday morning. We offer peace to one another. We shake hands, we embrace, and I stand up before the group, and the last thing they see is a person with their arms wide open, and it's still so hard to make the connection between that moment, that simple moment, and how we should all be standing on this planet. Because on everywhere else, it's this, Oh no, I want to embrace this more. If I could do anything differently, I want to be an advocate for that posture. I want to hear and tell more stories like Ibrahim and Miriam and mine, and let those be the stories we tell, because all we get are the other true stories. A guy who dresses himself up in an American uniform so he can shoot a guy who's in a NATO uniform, strapping bombs to one another, men, women, children. We're all doing it, and there are options, and we don't feel like there are options. And that's where I am.
Wow. It's easy to listen. It's easy to listen. I'm feeling kind of emotional right now. I don't know why. I just the culmination of what everyone has said. So I need to collect myself. When Suzanne started, she said creativity, and that was my word. When we decided to go into Afghanistan the way we did at all, I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed.
here I thought we could change the whole meaning of American exceptionalism, you know, and we could do something really different, you know. We could be creative. And you know, when we went into Afghanistan, I was so disappointed. I thought we were smarter. I thought we could do something better. I thought we could, you know, I'm not naive. I'm a very much a student of American foreign policy, too much. But I'm always hopeful, and I was just, this whole war nonsense of going into Afghanistan, I just, you know, I figured these guys, yes, they were, you know, they were criminals. They needed to be tried. They were criminals. This was not war. They were criminals, and that was that. And I'm not naive to the fact that I know that the State Department knew that there were cells all over the world that needed to be checked, and you know, I'm not naive to that. But we could have done something that just shocked the pants off them, set them back, you know. And you know, I was just, as I said, back in the late 70s and early 80s, I was a member of the Chicago Religious Task Force on Central America. And it was a group of Maryknoll nuns and Jesuit priests and Unitarians and Quakers and so on. And, you know, we were trying to let the American public know that we were supporting, that our American tax dollars were supporting these dictators in Central America to the absolute plight of these poor people. Just these guys were killing their own people in El Salvador and Honduras and Nicaragua, and it just broke my heart. And so, you know, as the 80s, and we're hearing about how we're spreading democracy around the world. No, we're not. So when we went into Afghanistan, I thought, there we go again. You know, trying to solve our problems on the backs of other people. Why do we always do that? We need to make sure we have enough oil. So, you know, we put a base in Saudi Arabia and we make sure we prop up the regime. We're a little worried about our trading partners in Southeast Asia. So, you know, we go to war in Vietnam. We're worried about our multinational corporations are worried about their future in Central America. So we plunder Central America. I thought, here we go, these poor people in Afghanistan. They've just had 10 years of war with the Russians. And I thought, you know, if those cells were in Germany, we wouldn't be bombing Germany. Hello? You know, but no, people in Afghanistan, they're like cannon fodder, you know. And I thought it was real. I really looked at myself when, a couple of years hence, I noticed that, and I was telling Bob this, that the night that I committed shock and awe in Iraq, I just broke down and cried. I didn't cry on 9/11. I didn't cry on 9/11. But boy, when we bombed those people in Iraq, I just lost it. Those poor people, they've suffered so much. Yeah, we've lost 3,000 people. We've suffered, and I'm as, patriotic as anybody. But they're losing hundreds of thousands of people. We lost 3,000. What's the point here? Are we more precious than other people? Is that it? That gives us permission to do this? But it wasn't popular to talk about not going into Afghanistan. Remember that? That was kind of a done deal. There was no debate. I've been really interested in sort of why people do what they do and why they are the way they are for years, and I've really studied American foreign policy, and one year I took it upon myself to go to do research all the different occasions over the last 20 years when people, when countries, when peoples, when leaders have apologized to nations and to other people. And I think I've got maybe 50 occasions. And what happened after that, and I'd say in about 3/4 of the cases, the people who received the apologies were so nonplussed and taken aback and so they felt so recognized, and well, I can't say how they felt, but those occasions have seen only good times. Those peoples have only, those relationships have improved, and so on. And this is a bit of a digression, but the Australians have took it even further. The Australians are dealing with their treatment of Aboriginals, and they have what's called Sorry Day. And every year they celebrate Sorry Day, and they apologize over and over and over again. And oh, there's so much I could say because I've thought about this so much. I just wish we could have shocked the world with our magnanimity, with our wisdom, with our collective, and we have it. We have collective wisdom here. Talk about squander. Well, you know, people say to me, when I criticize the United States, they say, oh, you're un-American. I said, on the other hand, I'm very American because I'm wanting this country to live up to its rhetoric. That's, you know, we are a beacon of democracy. We are blah, 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 blah. Let's live up to this. I'm tired of living this lie. So it's just, and so I felt the way Phyllis did when those guys crashed into the tower and those CNN guys were saying they're cowards. I'm thinking these were desperate people. You know, misguided, wrong thing to do, terrible thing to do. I don't justify it. But these were desperate people. And these were not uneducated. Some of them were doctors. Some of them were, you know, they were educated people. These are not easily led, you know, poor people that just came out of the jungle or whatever. I'm stumbling because there's so much I want to say. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
There's a lot of stuff here that's been said, and as I look over this question, what would have been an appropriate response? I have no idea. I can't answer would have, should have, could have questions. It has no meaning for me. So I was listening very intently to the responses that I was hearing, and I want to just say some of the things that struck me about the responses. I remember the sense of condolence, Phyllis, you talked about, and I thought that was very important. That I didn't know what that was about. I mean, somehow these were condolences that were coming in. It's as if I wasn't me. You know, there was something that happened. And what is that? They're feeling sorry. What happened here? They're feeling sorry for it, and it was strange. It was strange. It was an odd feeling. It was mysterious. I also remember feeling the sense of community. I think Wendy, you talked about community, and I remember coming to New York City for the first time after 9/11, and there were shirts there, and I remember the night of the 9/11 when my kids actually left. The other kids, I have 3 kids, and the other kid, 2 of them lived in New York. Josh didn't live in New York, but Noah and John lived in New York, and they said, we're leaving our building because there's so much smoke that we're going to leave where we live and we're going to stay in a hotel. And I guess all there was a blackout or something, and there was the power failure maybe. Anyway, they left the building. There was some danger that there would be the smoke would destroy capacity to breathe. And so I thought about that when I was in New York later, and I saw these shirts, and I thought, I want to get a shirt. There was a sense of community that was still there a couple of weeks, maybe it was a couple of months already afterwards. This lingered, and yet I also felt the sense of missed opportunity as time went on. It was not that long that we began to put all that stuff away. The sense of community. I remember when I was growing up, people, I lived in Philadelphia, and we thought New Yorkers were cold and angry. And I remember the typical New Yorker was John Voight in that film with Dustin Hoffman, and slapping the car, and that's what New Yorkers are about, and they're yelling and angry, and that all of that vanished in a moment with this sense that there were New Yorkers of all people pulling together, and so what are we to think about? What should we think about? Again, these should, would have, could have questions all get raised again in the 10-year anniversary. So I think about what Levinas says about suffering, and I'm responsive to what you said about Walter Wink's. Walter Wink came to one of our conferences, and he demonstrated this wonderful turn the other cheek. Said, well, it's actually a physical thing. He said, because if you're slapped on one side, you can't really turn. You can't turn. You actually destroy the possibility of. So you actually work against violence in a physical way. And I was very impressed by Walter Wink's response in that way. And you're quoting his phrase about the myth of redemptive violence. It reminded me of Levinas. Levinas says, the suffering of the other is never redemptive under any circumstances. The suffering of the other individual is never redemptive. Just a flat statement. The only suffering to which I can assign a meaning is my own. There's no circumstance in which I can say, well, yes, you suffered, yes, you had violence, but here's what comes. Nothing. No. There's nothing ever. So I began to think of Thich Nhat Hanh and the title of one of his famous books, Peace is the Way. In other words, it's not the end. Peace is the means. Aristotle used to talk about happiness as what he called an epiphenomenon. He said it's not something you can think of in itself, it's what comes after. And I think of peace that way. It's what comes after. It's an epiphenomenon. It's when you don't have what is normally there, violence, sacrificial behavior, causing the suffering of others, that you have peace. So you have to work against those other things that block peace. So peace is what you get as a kind of consequence of working to undo those other things. So then the question is, how do you undo it? And for all my engagement with Renee and Levinas it still seems to me that what we're all talking about is learning to restructure ourselves. I'm old enough to be cynical enough to think that we can't do much to change others. I mean, the older I get, the less I think that others can be changed. And really, we might be able to change the kind of toilet paper we use. We might be able to, choose a different brand of Buick this time or that time. I think maybe not. I think that what we probably can do is something internal. We can work on ourselves, and we can reorient ourselves and reposition ourselves. I loved what the two of you said about openness. Adrienne, about showing the central organs and exposing the organs, and Tripp, what you said about prayer. I didn't realize that prayer is openness. It's and again reminded me of this vulnerability. The question of what is the face? The face of the other individual is utter defenselessness. We're not seeing faces when we're speaking in political terms. We're not seeing faces. The rabbi would walk into the room. The Talmudic rabbis would walk into the room, and if a rabbi was teaching a class, he would look at everyone in the room face to face before he would start. Right? Face to face, everyone. Right? And then he would start. And what gets lost in political discussion is the face-to-face. So any position we have has already lost the face-to-face. As idealistic and as wonderful, as principled as it is, it lost the face-to-face. I remember I also have been thinking about political acts that have impressed me. What impressed me was Sadat going to Jerusalem and speaking face-to-face to these people, and how much that changed the world when he did that. And that seemed to me an extraordinary gesture. I think of the face-to-face between Ishmael and myself, and how brotherly we feel whenever we meet. And I think the face-to-face is the way, or is a way to peace. So maybe I'll stop.
I am absolutely impressed by the elegant response of all of you, and the thoughtfulness. I mean, you have taught me a whole lot. As I'm sitting in here listening, I learned a lot. And when I was teaching, which I retired in 1999, a student will come to me and say, "What is your middle name?" I don't have a middle name. I said, "My middle name is a student." I always listen to all of you, student and otherwise. And I learned from the student when I was writing the first edition of my book. So I learned from people by listening to them. And what Sandy just said is true. I never knew Sandy when I first met you. And we had only 2 or 3 days that we were talking. We became close friends. And one of Sandy's comments was that, "Is there anything between us that we differ?" I said, "I don't think I can find any, because there is no difference." And that's true. As I was sitting in here trying to answer the question that, Bob, you were raising, a lot of things came to my mind. And one thing that I thought, and I may be wrong, may tie some of these together, is this refrain that we heard so much: why do they hate us? And I look at myself. I came here not as an immigrant. I came as a student. I came from Oxford. Came here. At the time, I was in Oxford for 3 years. Then there was a international crisis between Britain and Iran over oil. And there was a diplomatic relationship was broken down. And I had really 2 options. Either return back to Iran, which I did not want to, because I had won a scholarship to be studying in Oxford. The second was to go to another country in Europe. Well, I did not know enough French to go to either France or Switzerland, so it was pointless to go there to study any field. And the people at Oxford suggested that maybe I should go to the United States. And there's a funny story about this, which indicates how much perception influences one's decision. When I went to the American Embassy, there were Consul General, who was a graduate of Columbia University, and Vice Consul, who was a graduate, both of them law school, graduate of Harvard University, Harvard Law School. So when I would go there, depending on who I would see, it was either Harvard or Columbia. Now, mind you, I was 16 when I left Iran. I was just 19, didn't know much about all the other things that is happening in the United States. It's preposterous to think that only there are 2 universities in this huge country. And this question always came up when I came to the United States. They said, "Don't you know that there are many, many universities? Why don't you go to these 2?" I said, "Well, I didn't. These 2 gentlemen decided for me." And the day I went to sign up the paper after I passed the exam and so on, the person who was there was a Consul General, graduate of Columbia Law School. So obviously, I knew where I was going to go because the perception was that superior school and all kinds of things. But then I learned that that's not the case. I mean, there are a lot of schools. And now, after that, when I advise a student where to go, I tell them it is not to the school that you go to. It's up to yourself. You're the one that decides how good of a person you become, not the school. The schools are all the same. In medical school, they teach the same thing. It's a name doesn't matter. You don't really put a name on the wall. The question is how good a judgment do you have as a physician. I don't think anybody, not even myself, when I go see a physician, I'll check the license they got, because that doesn't mean anything. It's a question of what do they do. So the perception is one idea. And as I was looking at the landscape of the countries, I decided that I would say a few words about Iran, because I know something more about it. And I will go back to when the relationship between Iran and England broke down because of oil. And as you may know, oil was discovered in Iran, the first country, back in 1901 by William Darcy. And the Iranian received a minuscule amount from the profit of oil, absolutely nothing to speak of. And when they were, and of course, because we needed oil, the Shah at the time, which was a son of the previous Pahlavi dynasty, he was a young man when he became the Shah, because it happened during the war. And they helped his father to abdicate, and there's a long story about that, but I don't want to say much about that, except that he became Shah, and he was surrounded by advisors who were telling him what to do, which is fine. Many people did not like those advisors, but that's besides the point. What happened was that in the next few years, after the war was over, in the early 50s, one of the educated person in the parliament of Iran, his name was Mossadegh. He was a graduate of Sorbonne, well educated, and an aristocrat. So he wasn't really a communist. These are two important things to know, because how things worked out, they accused him to be a communist. So what happened is that he wanted to have the oil nationalized, and he did. And that led to the Nasser in Egypt to nationalize the Suez Canal. This was kind of domino effect. And in the process, Iran was sued by Britain for the cost of the oil refinery, and the result went to Hague, and Mossadegh, very articulate, speaking in French, he won the lawsuit against Iran and forced Britain to simply give up everything for some reimbursement. And Iran was able to get a better deal for other countries, including some of the oil companies from the United States. But shortly after that, and of course Shah left Iran, and within a short time, they accused Mossadegh that he's a communist. And then CIA and MI5 of the Britain together tried to overthrow him. And they did. I remember that before leaving Tehran to come to Oxford, it was published in a newspaper that at that time they had given $5 million to a general whose son had married Shah's daughter, and the son became ambassador to the United States. So there was just a payoff. And so that was a time that everything changed. That was in 1953. And in 1979, these people who were supporting Mossadegh went underground, came back 25 years or so later, and had the revolution that we heard about. And in that revolution, instead of reaching out to them, which would have been a simple thing to do, there was all kinds of misunderstanding in conversation. Each one said something, somebody said something in English, the other side something in Farsi, and the translation was gobbled up. They didn't know who was saying what, and that led to the problem that we have. Now we have a bigger problem. And it isn't that the people hate the United States. They don't really like to see us supporting these dictators. And Shah was a really a dictator, and he was actually a playboy. It's well known that every Friday they will have some ladies brought from France, and he was married at the time. And of course, nobody would say anything. And they had every building that you can imagine was confiscated by his father, and they had the ownership. So people had nothing. When I left in Iran in 1952, they were trying to put piping in the ground for clean water. And I went back there 20 years later, and they were doing the same, they still were doing the same thing. And I went there at the invitation of the Shah to see if I would accept presidency of Tehran University. And I met with him in his office, in this huge palace. In front of the stairway, at that time, there was a huge statue of the Shah made from steel. In 1996, I was invited to go back to Iran. I did not really approve of the government they have there, to give some lectures. And as part of my being there, and a few other people from this country, they took us for a tour of that palace, where that statue was. The statue was cut in half. The top part was not there. The bottom half was there. And then they escorted us up to where the Shah's office was, where I actually talked to him. And on the wall, you couldn't go in, but on the side, you could see the score of the pool that he had played with somebody. He liked billiard. And it was me, himself, maybe 5, and so-and-so 1. I mean, he referred to himself Shah and Shah. The interest of people wasn't there. So we supported these people, and people haven't forgotten that. And when Eisenhower came to Iran, after he was elected, they could not drop a pin. Millions of people out there praising him, waving American flag, because he did something great for Iran. He forced the Russian to leave the northern part of Iran. So people don't forget these things. It's a fact that we should be doing, in my judgment, what made this country great. Our principle of democracy, which really was practiced by many of the presidents in the past. So we don't really do that. And as an American, I'd love to see us to stand for democracy, for what is good. What is good for us, it should be good for the other people. That we don't really say. It's only talked about it here. We never promote it overseas. And you have all of these problems that you're now seeing around the world. Every one of these people who are not willing to leave, we supported them. It was our dollar, our tax dollar that kept them in office. They wouldn't be in office without having an army that was paid by us and now ruling the people. And the people realize that they've got nothing, and these guys are getting millions of dollars saved someplace, and they have nothing. So I think the day we stop doing that, changing our policy to more realistic, I think things will be different.
Shortly after 9/11, there was something in the New Yorker that, and I assume this really happened. And if it didn't happen, it should have happened. But it was a somewhat lengthy comment about somebody who had taken a flight within, I don't know, the first several weeks after 9/11, and the pilot just made this announcement that there will not be a hijacking on this plane and then he just invited everyone on the plane to say hello to the person sitting next to you and start to talk to that person. And if we are collectively connected with each other, a hijacking like the kind that occurred a week or so ago would not be possible. And that story just just kind of knocked me over. How simple and common, what common sense there was, and how beyond the pale it is. This is not what we do, and the question of why that is the case still haunts me. And I feel it in myself. I feel a great deal of, reserve towards strangers. Well, I'm not permitted to say, to blah blah blah, to talk and to, and to get to know this person and to share myself with them, because that's not what we do. But that is the beginning of what has to change. Certainly. Well, another thing that comes to my mind was. I heard a guy speak once, a professor who was talking about comparing Christianity and Judaism, and he said something that has also stuck with me. He said, "The shallower you look, the deeper the differences." And just as you were talking, you guys look like brothers, and you're dressed almost like twin brothers. Yeah. It's so simple to connect in that way, and when we connect in that way, to the abstraction. We can't abstract the other person into something less than human. And when we connect and we are fully human, we can't make war on that person. And on that person's. When we went to Iraq, we didn't go, make war on 20 million people. We made war on Saddam Hussein. It was one person who was the bad guy, and so that we're going after Saddam. It's such a stupid thing, and it's such a lie, and it's such a horror. What we did, and what war always does. And when we are moving towards war, we move on a drumbeat, and it's and it's just all this flow of adrenaline. And then when war comes home, when war is over, it's the corpses, it's the wrecked humans. PTSD is stronger, is more, hits harder. It's not when you are in a dangerous situation that is the great cause of PTSD. It's if you have those who have killed, especially those who have killed an unarmed person. Those are the ones in whom this is clinically verified. That's where PTSD is the strongest and hits the hardest and is the most pervasive. It's our own conscience is chewing us up and eating us alive. And it's interesting, Linda, that you talked about forgiveness and studying forgiveness. I've also informally collected forgiveness stories, which fascinate me. But one thing I noticed is that when an important person does an act of forgiveness, it's usually after they leave power. Or else it's way after the fact of what has occurred. The Pope apologizing for the Inquisition 500 years too late. And that sort of thing. So while I like those forgiveness stories, I want to see them happen when we're in when there is political power behind them. After the power is gone, and that's our myth of forgiveness, is that it's a weak thing and it's not about power. And so how do we combine love and forgiveness and connectedness with power? And to me, this is the puzzle of 9/11. Is making that making that consciousness public. I think about Europe finally got it after World War II. The second collective mass suicide attempt of the 20th century, and the European Union started to come into existence when they finally figured out maybe we should not try to kill each other because we are killing ourselves. And if Europe can do it, perhaps the whole world can do it. My daughter, a couple of years ago, after she graduated, spent a year, lived in Copenhagen. So I went to visit her, and we had the opportunity because a friend of hers had their family had a cottage on the North Sea. So we went to the North Sea, and so I got to see, the North Sea coast of Denmark, which is lined with Nazi bunkers. These concrete, evil, ugly-looking bunkers, mostly sinking now into the sand. The Danes have built like sculptures. They've turned them into horses. It was the most delightful thing. The thought that came to my mind afterwards was, well, they're dancing with history. And Adrian, you talked about dancing right at the beginning. I think that's a good idea to dance together and to make music together. And how do we collectively? Creativity. That's also an important word for me. How are we creative together? I think a lot has emerged in these last 2 hours. It's quite remarkable how quickly time can go. I could go on and on, but I think I will. I say I think something important has happened this afternoon. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank all of you for speaking with such eloquence and such honesty. And I can't wait to see what happens next. I think that we're on to something.